Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone, here on Big Blend Radio's Nature Connection today, which is going to go out to our other channels like Garden Gossip and probably our Women Making History channel. We have Paula Whyman joining us. She is an author and a writer, and her memoir is out now, and it's called Bad Naturalist. I didn't know you could be a bad naturalist. It is Bad Naturalist, One Woman's Ecological Education on a Wild Virginia Mountaintop. And you can go to her website, paulawhyman.com, and that's YWHYMAN. So welcome, Paula. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Today, as we record this, we are near the Blue Ridge Mountains. In fact, we've got beautiful views. We're just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, so not far from your area. But I think the Blue Ridge is like that parkway is like a thoroughfare that connects everybody. So it's a beautiful, beautiful area that you're in. I know we've been through it, but not quite. We haven't been to your mountaintop yet.
Well, you should
But
come.
I know Virginia is beautiful and natural, and I was going to ask you, going from you decided to go, hey, I'm going to actually cultivate some land, or not necessarily cultivate, but restore it and get a couple acres, and that kind of went a little. It's kind of like us, so we kind of just start saying, why not? We'll just go for the big version of it, right? Tell us a little bit of how this all started.
Yeah, it was very serendipitous. It kind of happened by accident. My husband and I had been searching for a long time for a place in the country, that we could eventually move to. And we'd been looking for years and years. And what we were looking for sort of evolved over time, but it was always like a little farmhouse we could fix up, a little piece of land where I could have a vegetable garden and my husband loves to do planting and landscaping.
Oh,
And he's an Eagle Scout, so he loves the
okay,
outdooring stuff.
cool.
Um, but it evolved over time. I also wanted to raise a few sheep, like five, not 300. But
But they're cute.
I then, we kept looking off and on, but not really in earnest. And about 5, 6 years ago, we started looking in earnest. Our kids had gone off adulting and we had a little more flexibility and thought we could maybe really make this happen now. But again, we were looking for something small. And at the
Mhm.
same time, I had been reading about the importance of native plants. I had been reading Doug Tallamy's Nature's Best Hope and
He's
learned about his
awesome.
homegrown national park project, bringing native plants back to your yard for birds and pollinators and so on. And I had read Isabella Tree's book, Wilding, which talks about how she let her 3,000 plus acre farm in England go back to nature. And she reintroduced animals to mimic the animals that might have once lived there and all of this. And I was really excited about these ideas. And I thought, okay, I can do my part. Wherever we end up, I'm going to plant a small meadow, like maybe an acre or two, and I'm going to plant a native meadow, and I'm going to put my little writing shed in the nearby so I can watch the birds. And yeah, it was a very delusional kind of idea. And then one day we were looking in the area where we ended up settling, was the area we were focused on, this particular area because it's really beautiful. And um, we were out there one day and somebody said, "Oh, you have to go see this mountaintop. The view is just incredible. You just have to see the view." And so we thought, okay, while we're out here looking for a farmhouse,
Yeah.
we will go up and see the view. It was August, so it was very hot.
Mm.
Sun was beating down. When we got there, we realized that there was really no road to get up there. The road sort of stopped at a certain point, and we hiked the rest of the way up on like basically what had become a trail that maybe was once a gravel road. It was rocks and roots, and there was no way to drive all the way up. And when we got up there, they had just mowed this little path through all the vegetation. It had been a cattle farm for many years, but it
Yeah.
had gone to seed. So it hadn't been touched in a
Mm.
few years, and everything had grown up. It was all over our heads. And there were these yellow flowers. I don't know I didn't know what they were at the time. And so we were walking this narrow path, going up to a high point to see the view. And the whole time we're surrounded by this jungle of vegetation. that's over 6 feet high in
Mm.
places. And we get to the top and we look out. And I mean, if you're seeing the video, you can see what's behind me, the background. But I saw this area of rolling hills, steep slopes, open meadow. And at this time, it was filled with these yellow flowers that,
Oh,
were over my head. And I looked out at that and I thought, wow, okay, I had this idea to plant a little small meadow and for birds and so on. And now I look out and I see this, well, it was really acres and acres of old fields and what turned out to be 75 or 80 acres of open meadow on top of a mountain, which in the East is
wow.
pretty unusual, surrounded by these forested slopes. And I just thought, wow, my idea seems really small in comparison with what I'm looking at, and think what I could do here. Maybe I could do something really big and really impactful and everything. But at the same time, like, I wasn't thinking about the fact that I really didn't know anything about plants because I was always like passionate about nature, but I came to it from an interest in wildlife
Yeah.
and, that angle on ecology. So this was something new, and I didn't think about like the fact that I wouldn't know where to begin. I wouldn't know what questions to ask. I had no idea what to do, but I thought I could do something here, and that was sort of the end of that. And then the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, but to get that kind of land, especially, I know that they had what, apple trees growing there too at one point, and then cattle pasture. There's a national wildlife refuge that we went to in southeast Arizona, Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge. It's
Oh,
beautiful. And it's right on the border of Mexico too, Sasabe and then Aravaca, this area that's
oh,
farmland and mesquite trees. But these were mesquites that weren't put there naturally. It was by
mm,
people. And so this wildlife refuge spans all these different ecosystems. There's a cienega, so it's like your waterway, and then it has shortgrass prairie, which
mm,
is massively like exciting, and then
mm-hmm.
mountains where you can find bear. So this is like a cool area. So the shortgrass prairie they were bringing back, and the whole reason it went from being a cattle ranch into a wildlife refuge is to bring back the bobwhite quail. So it was all about this
Ah,
bird. And then they started reintroducing the pronghorn antelope into the picture. And we used to live in Tucson, so we used to go there a lot. And it's you get like ringtail cats, and I mean it's awesome. And watch the pronghorn at certain times of year. You see them with their babies, and the birding is beyond amazing. But we went out with the superintendent quite a few times and learned about what they were doing for this restoration of the land because they had this Pima pineapple cactus. It's like this
mm,
little cactus, but it was endemic to this region and it was getting wiped out because of what happened with the cattle on this property. So they were doing a lot of burning and then it was going to, you know what I mean? So they were and you could see the areas where this had worked and then they replanted and you could see all these forbs and I learned the beauty of forbs. Like now wherever we hike or wherever I'm like, forb, it's happy. People think I'm weird. Forb alert. So did you have that kind of experience too when you start to see things come back that are natural?
Oh yeah, that was really well. So we did do some prescribed burns on this property. And
Yeah.
by the way, you mentioned the bobwhite quail, and the bobwhite quail is also a ground nesting bird that's in decline in the east as well.
Oh, okay.
So that is one of the birds that I was thinking about. When I talked to people, I was hearing about the bobwhite quail a lot and how um, when you have a dense hayfield that's full of fescues and it tends to create sort of a mat on the ground, and it's very difficult for those little birds that are ground feeders and
Mm,
ground nesters to navigate. They just can't, it's too dense. So you really need those prairie grasses, those native
yeah.
warm season grasses that grow. They're bunch grasses and they grow with space between them, and
Mm-hmm.
that leaves space for the birds to get around. And that's something that I was hoping to achieve in places on the meadow here. So we did burn in a couple of places to try to get rid of that matted, even when it would die, the fescue and the hay grasses would form this mat. Um, and it was really exciting to see when, I mean, I had to be very careful to choose the places where I burned, because if you burn the wrong, if you burn and you're not sure what's there, you could get just a field full of invasive plants. Um,
Oh,
if you
okay.
if you burn, so the idea was to choose a place that had a high concentration of native plants already, because then the presumption would be those plants are in the seed bank, they're in the soil, the seeds are in the soil, and fire, native plants here are fire adapted. So
Hmm.
they're encouraged by fire. They'll seed more, they'll reproduce more, they'll grow more quickly. Things like that will happen. However, there are also some invasive plants that are encouraged by fire. So you have
Hmm.
to be careful and know as best you can what's in the field so you don't end up with bad surprises. And still, you might have bad surprises. But it was
Yeah.
really exciting because in one of the fields where I burned just this past fall, I was out there with a friend of mine, and she spotted a tiny orchid in the field that I
Ooh.
had never seen there before. And I mean, God bless her, I never would have noticed it either because it was, so tiny. It's called ladies' tresses,
Oh,
and it was growing in this field
that's
that was
exciting.
burned. And yeah, so things like that. And also we have heard bobwhite quail on the property. After
Oh,
like the
wow.
first 2 years of work, I've been working on this for about 4 years now,
Mm,
and um, after about 2 years, we started to see real changes like that. And that was very exciting. Now, I'd love to
that's
be
cool.
able to bring back animals like the
The
pronghorn.
pronghorn. Yeah, I know.
I mean,
And I'm thinking now if it was masked bobwhite quail. Now I can't
mm,
remember. I don't know, but
here
it's a
it's
quail.
northern bobwhite. It's northern
Okay.
bobwhite out
It
here.
might be
Yeah.
masked out there, but it's so cool to I miss quail, because we when we went to Arizona last year, at the end of last year, we saw quail and more doves than normal than like back east. It's just different.
Hmm.
But to
Hmm.
see things like the Mariposa lilies would come out in the spring out there, which are like these just vibrant little hardy little plants, but they were coming back. And there's just it's I don't know, and the native plants are beautiful. And I think these are these projects where the desert though is weird because the desert, the flowers are little tiny things like you have the fairy dusters and all of that people don't really consider, oh, it's not a big blossom. And then you have to
Mm,
change your perspective of what is beautiful, and
yeah.
actually recognize beauty. So these projects, did you find things that like the orchid that you didn't know about? And they're sometimes smaller and just completely different. And that's what I think people kind of didn't get into native plants, I mean, we're a lot better now than we were 20 years ago about native plants. I mean,
Yeah.
I think people just didn't think they were pretty, but it's not true, you know?
Well, I think we were, I mean, historically in this country, there's been the exotic plant trade that started in the late 1700s was all about getting interesting plants from other countries and sending our interesting plants to other countries and trading and so on. And that's how a lot of invasive plants got here.
Hmm.
People would plant them, they would escape the garden and populate wild places. And then others were planted intentionally for utilitarian reasons that, not knowing enough, knowing now, knowing then what we knew now wouldn't have happened. But um, yeah, I think native plants had a bad rap for some reason because I happen to think they're beautiful, like wild
Mm-hmm.
bergamot.
Mm.
Some people call it bee balm. Comes in so many beautiful colors naturally. And even crownbeard, that yellow plant, that yellow flower that I saw
Yeah.
out here, it has kind of a bad rap because it's, the flowers are scraggly and so on, but it attracts so many butterflies and bees, and it's really a great plant if you have a large area like I do,
Mhm.
where it doesn't matter if it's sort of aggressive. Milkweed. I think milkweed has beautiful flowers,
That's awesome.
and there are so many interesting varieties. Um, and I mean, cultivars. People like cultivars, but they're kind of a problem because they can mix with the native species, and
Hmm.
that reduces the diversity of the native species, and
Mm.
and it could wipe them out. And
Hmm.
cultivars don't always have the right elements to feed pollinators and attract the insects and so on,
Hmm.
because you change their color, or you change the way, the number of petals or something like that, and the bee or the other pollinator or insect may not recognize it. It may not
Yeah.
bloom at exactly the right time for the insect that pollinates it, or all kinds of issues with that.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of hoping people will get more interested in native plants. Like when I started out, I didn't really know much about plants at all, like I said.
Hmm.
And when I started to learn the difference between the native plants, I mean, the native plants are adapted to the soil where,
Hmm.
where they come from.
Hmm.
So they're likely to do better. It's not that you don't have to do anything to them, um, but you don't have to do as much. You don't have to
Yeah.
fertilize to get
Yeah.
them to
They
grow.
they take a couple years maybe to get established, but once they're established, and it's part of creating that web of life we're talking about. I mean,
Yeah.
in Southern California, in the desert out there in the Colorado desert, there it like I know in the Anza Borrego area, there's this one little patch of desert, like this one specific yucca plant feeds
Mm.
this one specific moth species, and that moth, these, it's like a symbiosis. If they don't have each other, they're both gone. And it's like,
Hmm.
dude, like, don't touch this land, like, you know. And you see developments going up everywhere, and I kind of feel like I wish people would kind of look at the land on that native web of life kind of thing. I know people are going to still build houses and everything. I understand all that, but just stop it. Just, but you've got to look at what we're doing with the chemicals when we build.
Yeah.
And I think if we could get to the engineers before they build, that there are ways to work with nature to have homes so that it will protect the homes even better.
Hmm. Well, I think that's something that I was sort of guilty of. I've lived in the city, I've lived in the suburbs. Now I'm living on this mountain, which I didn't have a house here for the first until a few months ago. So I was
Yay.
coming and going, and that was it was exhausting, honestly.
Yeah.
But in the suburbs, a lot of times, uh, and I don't think I'm the only one who had this experience, you have a sort of shields up mentality where, like, you focus on the pests, the creatures
Yeah.
that are trying to get into your house that don't belong there, the mice or the mosquitoes or the ants or whatever, and the poison ivy. And so the things that you don't want in your yard, rather than focusing on the positive aspects and the fact that you're actually living with you're actually part of nature. And yes, you can build an edifice that is maybe um, more solid than most creatures can build, and we're humans, so we have bigger brains and all that stuff, and we can reason and so on. But we're maybe more territorial in that way than some other,
Yeah.
although other species are pretty territorial. We're better at enforcing it, and so we tend to get into this antagonistic relationship with what's happening in our yard. And I know that I was guilty of trying to control everything when, on my little patch in the suburbs. And coming out here to the mountain, it was like, obviously, I can't control everything on 200 acres. I can barely control
Yeah.
everything on a quarter acre. And so it really helped me rethink that whole
Mm.
relationship, um, and see myself as more connected. And
Mm.
I think, even when I'm back in the suburbs now, because I'm still here some of the time, uh, I I have a different kind of attitude about
Mm.
it. I, s- So my
Yeah.
attitude sort of evolved, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, it's hard because of homeowner associations too, right? So I remember when I was a kid, my mom had taken out the lawn, the front lawn. She pulled it out and she mixed a bunch of wildflower seeds, native wildflower seeds, and planted a field of flowers. And first people are like, oh my God, she took out the lawn. This is like years ago, ancient times. And she did, but then everybody started stopping. And we did it in the desert. We put all these native plants in and had beautiful gardens and we let like nature be. And when it does, it's pretty miraculous what happens. It's pretty amazing. But if you have a homeowners association, they're not going to like you pulling out the lawns and that sort of things.
Yeah,
So that's a
I mean,
hard thing. Yeah. And I just
yeah.
think that eventually we may get to that point of going more native through those associations.
I think, and I think that at least in some places that's starting to change. Now I can't remember what county it is, but there's a county in Virginia where the homeowners associations are actually getting together to remove invasive plants that were planted probably intentionally when those communities were established because
Wow.
you didn't know any better at that point.
Mm.
So that's really, that's a really promising development.
Mm.
And I hope there'll be more of that.
I know Bethesda Green in Bethesda, Maryland, they did things where they would go into low income communities and reclaim the land, put forests, put native plants. They did like composting bins, they did all kinds of things.
Huh.
And it was like for the health of these communities. It was really amazing. Our friend, he's passed away sadly. He did all that work with his group, and it was incredible through volunteers and partnerships going in and like planting trees. I mean, that we have that issue in this country of areas not having trees. And
Yeah.
then if it's not native, like you were talking about that resiliency that native plants have, right? And with climate change, the more we have the resilient plants, the better. I think for them to get through the changes and maybe help mitigate. Have you gone through any of that part in this 200-acre project? I think what you're doing is so cool. I'd live out there in a tent, except for not in the winter. That's not happening.
Thank you. Well, um, I think right now I am still working on tipping the balance toward native plants, but I do definitely see the resiliency because at least on my land, it's a very dry, rocky, highly erodible
Mm.
landscape. So the plants have to be adapted to live in sort of what you would consider poor soil. And native plants here are adapted to poor soil. That's the kind of soil, or quote unquote poor soil. I mean, the kinds of organisms, the soil organisms that the native plants here need are here. And the
Mm.
more native plants grow, the more the organisms development. And, it's sort of a
All that good
cycle because
stuff.
they evolved together. And
Mm.
just like they evolved with the birds and insects and so on that support them, those plants and those native insects support each other. Um, so now I lost track of your question.
I was just talking about climate change, the resiliency, because like you're talking about
Oh,
erosion,
yeah.
right? When you have
Yeah.
that kind of
So
erosion, if you have the right plants, it's not going to erode as much as something that doesn't know how to hang in there. You got the creepers up there, don't you? what,
which
what are I know there's a Virginia
Oh,
creeper highway
Virginia
or something.
creeper. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you
Virginia
got the
creeper.
creepers.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's an aggressive plant. Some people don't like
Hmm.
it. They'll pull it out. I actually think it's really pretty. It turns a nice
I
red
do
in the
too.
fall. Yeah, I think it's beautiful. And I mean, yes, we have, hillsides of broom sedge, which a lot of people don't like. If you ask a farmer, they don't want broom sedge. It means the soil is poor if you're a farmer and it's in your pasture. It's
Oh,
growing there because it may be growing there because the soil has been overgrazed and depleted
oh,
of nutrients that support pasture grasses,
wow.
non-native cool season pasture grasses
Yeah.
and hay grasses. Whereas when I see it growing on my meadow, I'm like, oh, it belongs there. Broom sedge, little blue stem, Indian grass,
Oh,
purple love grass, all those grasses are meant to be there, and they help create and help, they help create the soil that supports them. So it's, like I said, it's a cycle.
yeah, it's
Um,
it's a relationship, you know. I
yeah.
love this because all the different plants too, like when I was talking about that wildlife refuge, Buenos Aires, where they had restored, and you could tell the difference. And we've been to a lot of places that have done restoration work, and you go back later, it's like, wow, you can see wherever the birds are. When the birds are there, you know everybody's happy. Well, I would take a photo of a flower. There's a native poppy flower out there, and I didn't quite see it as I'm taking the photo. I'll see like maybe a caterpillar or something. And then I blew up the photo, I'm going, oh my God, there's like three tiny spiders. There's a
Mm.
this, there's a beetle, there's a that. I mean, there's probably 10 to 15 insects on one small bloom. And then I'm like, dude, this is so cool. you know, I think it's cool. I don't know. It's like it brings the kid into me out of me, you know. So for you with this property and this project, you know, are you finding like that you're just learning stuff all the time and you know, kind of like, wow, look at that, you know?
Well, so much, and I came to this really from a fascination with insects. When I was a kid, I
Yeah.
used to like, I was really focused on insects. I would collect live insects. I would let them crawl on me, and
okay, we're
I,
friends.
I would go through these various deep dives where I would get really fascinated with some particular creature, and I'd have to know everything I could about it, and I wouldn't stop until, and most recently there were carpenter bees. I needed to know all about carpenter bees. And
Cool.
so I would come at it from that angle. And now one of the most um, fun things for me is making discoveries like that on the mountain. Like I spend a lot of time just walking around and taking pictures, making notes, um, and then when I get back home, doing research about the things that I saw and found, and like, what
Mm.
does this mean? What does this do? How do these things possibly work together? And discovered all kinds of interconnections among the plants and the wildlife that way. And it's really an endless source of fascination for me. There
Mm.
was one I talk about in the book. There's a caterpillar that is carnivorous that eats,
Oh,
um, you know, it will eat the galls that grow on the leaves of the wild cherry tree because this mite, lays its eggs there, and then the leaf forms a gall around
oh
the
yeah, yeah.
mite, and the caterpillar eats the gall and the mite and the larva, whatever's in there, um, and basically protects the tree. And meanwhile, there's an ant that likes this sweet, fluid that's secreted by the caterpillar. So it protects the caterpillar from being eaten by a wasp that's
This
interested in the caterpillar. And I was like, this is so cool.
it
And
is cool. That is the web of life. It really is.
And so I started to ask myself, well, what would happen? Because if you had this tree in your backyard, a black cherry tree, and you saw these galls growing on the leaves, you might think there's something attacking it. I need to spray the tree. And if you sprayed the tree, what would happen is you'd kill everything but the thing that's in the gall. And the
God.
cherry tree supports like over 400 pollinator species. It's actually amazing. The wild cherry tree.
Wow.
It's actually one of the most important trees on the mountain, because it supports all these different species of caterpillar, which of course in turn supports the birds. And I started to
Pollination
ask
and
myself,
yeah.
well, if it has all of these caterpillars attacking it all the time, how is it still alive? And it's because there are enough predators for these caterpillars. So it's
Yes.
all keeping it in balance. And if you sprayed the tree because you saw this one thing that you thought was attacking it and didn't take the time to figure out what was going on,
Mm,
and like didn't discover those interconnections, you would kill all those caterpillars. And the
that sucks.
mite that made the galls would probably kill the tree.
Yeah, that sucks. And the birds would be like, dude, you just ruined it. You
Yeah.
ruined breakfast for me. Well, that's
So,
what I learned from Doug Tellamy when he was on the show. He was talking about how because I'm like, let the deer be, let them
Oh, the
just be
deer,
everywhere.
yeah.
But he was explaining, well, we got rid of the predators.
Hmm.
As we get rid of predators, it's what we tend to do as humans. Oh, we need to, like, there's that fear thing, and we need to, like you're saying, like when you live in the suburbs, like, oh no, no, we don't want that. It's like, don't, oh my gosh, there's a snake, kill it. That's the first thing I see when you
Hmm.
post, like even with all the park stuff I used to put, oh, like, look at this tarantula. Then people are like, kill it. That's a no good thing. And I'm like, do I keep posting these kinds of things? Or, I don't know. Like we have to have these conversations with people and say, the tarantula is really good for the soil, so is the snake. And they are pretty cool. Tarantulas are cool. I like them. Do you get them up in your area? The tarantulas?
I haven't seen any. That doesn't mean we don't have them. There are a lot of
Oh,
places for them to hide. I've seen some
yeah.
pretty interesting spiders.
All right. So do you put any of the findings on like an iNaturalist site or anything like that?
I do submit to iNaturalist sometimes.
I love them.
I really just started doing that. So I don't have too many pictures on there yet, but I do have some, and it's really interesting. I think that is a great app,
It's
because it's
awesome.
crowdsourced and people who know what they're doing come and, say what that is and so on.
And they
Um,
argue sometimes,
yeah.
but it's polite. It's polite, but it's citizen science. And so a
Yeah.
lot of and I need to go back and start doing it again because I kind of fell off that for a little bit. But I did a lot in Arkansas. And actually it was we were staying on a little farm. This lady had taken this old farmhouse and redid it all herself. Like the floorboards were gone, and she just went in there and said, I'm going to do this. She was a farmer, organic farmer from California. And she like, I'm going to Arkansas, for different reasons. And she left there's like a field on either side with a meadow and let that just be its thing. And she did her own little vegetable patch and everything. But this meadow is like full of flowers. I don't know where all these daylilies came from in Arkansas. I don't know
Mm,
if they are
they're
good,
invasive.
bad. They're
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 bad.
pretty. I know, but you
They
see,
are
but
pretty,
but
but
they're pretty.
they escape the garden and they're really aggressive.
They're everywhere. They're
Yeah,
everywhere. But she left things, and I would see all kinds of things in her garden. I mean, everything was there, and fireflies. And at night we would
that's
just sit out
great.
there and get bitten. But we watch the bats come. The bats are cool. They took care of the mosquitoes. That's the other part. Is like, people want to kill all the mosquitoes. I get it, but like
When they
bats.
kill the mosquitoes, they also kill the bees and the spiders and everything else. And
That's a
you
good point.
can't the pesticides that are used on that people spray, mosquito Joe and all that. They say, oh, it doesn't hurt other insects, but that's a lie, frankly. That's not true. It's not
Mm.
possible to kill an insect with pesticide and not kill other insects with that same
And then
pesticide.
they say it's fine for pets. I don't think so. I
I
I see. I've heard so many stories
I
because we
wouldn't want
pet
it for
sit as we
children either.
travel. Yeah, and there's animals that are all having allergy problems now. So many
Mm.
dogs and cats, dogs, and I'm going, you're walking them in the, landscape grasses, and what is that fertilizer doing? What are those sprays that they're using doing to the animal paws? And so all these animals are itching and scratching that never used to before, and I think it's all those pesticides.
Yeah.
I can't prove it, but they can go run on your acreage.
Yeah. Yes, we don't use I avoid pesticides as much as possible. There are places where I've had to spot treat invasives, but
Mm,
I haven't done a lot of people will just like spray a whole field to
ooh.
especially if it's really been taken over by invasives. Sometimes that's the only way.
Mm.
Um, but I've avoided that so far. Uh,
Well, the invasive work is really tricky, like you were saying at the beginning here, because whatever you do, you could be spreading it, right? So you have to be really careful with how you get rid of the invasives.
You can spread it on your vehicles, on your equipment, on your shoes, your dog's coat, gets full of seeds. And yeah, it's easy to spread it from one end of the property to the other. I noticed that there's a path through the meadow that we keep mowed, and Past couple of years, it's been lined with stilt grass. And
Mm,
I think what's happening is there's stilt grass in one spot and the mower blows it across the, across the other end of the path, and then it's all over the place, the
mm,
seeds. And that's actually something to think about if you're in the suburbs and you ever use a leaf blower or your neighbor uses a leaf blower, whatever seeds they're blowing, whatever seeds you're blowing, it's going everywhere.
mm. I hate leaf blowers. I detest them.
Yeah.
And it wreaks havoc with the internet. So I wanted to ask you with this project, which is going to be never ending, right? This is like the never ending story. I love it
Yeah.
though. Have you learned something personally from watching nature that has changed you?
I'm not a patient person. and, and yet I chose this project that involves waiting for plants to grow. And
It's
it's
like, come
probably the
on.
slowest possible timeline. So I have had to learn patience to know that when I burn a field, it's going to be a few weeks to a few months before I see what comes up afterwards, and it's all going to be a big surprise. Some of it will
Mm,
be a big surprise, and what's going to come up the next year might be different.
yeah.
Um, I need to also, I've learned to sort of let things go and be a little more zen about my approach. Like when I started out, I was like, okay, how do I get rid of these invasives? I must do
I'm
this. I
coming after
must
you.
do that.
Yeah.
And and I soon learned, especially after talking with all the experts who had way more experience and knew things and were educated in these topics and so on, that I wasn't necessarily going to get rid of them. I could manage them and maybe direct them and maybe keep them from growing in new places, but I wasn't going to be able to rid the property of
Mm,
invasive plants. It was just not realistic. Birds and animals were always going to be bringing them in. Equipment was always going to be bringing them in. Even if I could get rid of what was there for like 1 minute, it wouldn't last.
yeah,
And a lot of
exactly.
those things are in the seed bank. So I also had to realize that I'm one person, my husband is one person. We might have one person to help us now and then. There's not a lot of people available to do this work where we live.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I'm over here at one end of the meadow working on something and I have no idea what's going on a quarter mile, a half mile away on the other end of the meadow. And until I get a bad surprise or maybe a good surprise. So I had to really learn to let it go and say, okay,
Mm,
I'm not going to be able to do everything. I'm just going to try to focus on I need to prioritize. I need to make
mm.
choices. And my choices might not be the same as someone else's, and that's okay.
Yeah, because you can't be perfectionist with nature. Nature does what nature wants to, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but it is rewarding when you work out in nature. There's
It's
like
very
the end of the
rewarding.
day feels good.
Yeah.
It feels
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we lost sight of that over the years too, is how, beneficial it is for us to be outside in the sunshine or in the rain doing something with nature for nature. It's like it's your body. I think it's part of us. Like we're supposed to be doing that,
Well,
you
we are
know?
nature. We carry it
Yeah.
around with us. So we are connected with everything, just like all of the other creatures and plants. We are connected with everything. And
Mm-hmm.
even though we've been able to physically and mentally separate ourselves, we're not really
Yeah.
separate. And I guess
Mm.
the more we recognize that, maybe the more we'll be able to, maybe probably will feel better. And
Be healthy. Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
it's more zen when you think about it, trying to meditate. Like for me, like everything's going. Like I got the monkey mind for sure. But if I'm out in nature and I'm studying a bird or something, like that's it. I'm in that zone. So that to me, like is the quickest way to meditate. Forget the rest of it. I'm not going to sit still and put my fingers in a position and go, yes, I'm meditating. It's not happening. Put me in nature, I can do it. Isn't it's weird? Like we're all different, but nature seems to have its a healing power for us humans. And then if we're taking care of it and not putting all these toxins, that's even better.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This is cool what you're doing. I love it. I love it, love it, love it. And I love that you've done this as a memoir too. So it's not like a, you've got to do this, you know, because I think we also, as when we look at the environment, we tend to want to preach to everybody what to do. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That doesn't,
No,
it
nobody
doesn't.
wants to read that.
No, no. I
No,
like
I, yeah.
personal accounts, you know. So again, everyone, it's Bad Naturalist. It's out now. Go to paulawhyman.com. The link is in the episode notes, and you can get the book everywhere books are sold. It's out through Timber Press, and definitely go check it out. It's a good time to get planning on gardening depending on where you are in the world, right? Some people might be digging through ice and snow right now, but for
Yes.
those of us in other areas, might start thinking about what you can do. And it does, this gives us, that's the other thing, you give people hope when things look very scary about what's going on with our natural world. This is a way that we can kind of, because my favorite quote is Joan Baez is, action is the antidote to despair. And
Mm.
so there are these little things we can do, or big 200-acre projects that we can do to feel like, okay, I can at least control this. Well, kind of, right? You're finding out that doesn't really work. I can be part of this environment, in the rehabilitation of and reclaiming of nature and the land. I think it gives people hope of what they can do instead of watching the news and getting irate.
Absolutely. I think it's really, you absolutely don't need 200 acres. If you have a window box, if you can put a potted plant on your porch, if you have a little spot in your backyard, you can plant one native plant. And if you like birds, plant something that's supposed to attract birds. If you like butterflies, plant something that's supposed to attract butterflies, and then see what happens. And it's very empowering, I think,
Mm-hmm.
to to know that what happens there, that you did that. You made that
Mm-hmm.
happen, and it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't planted that thing. And
Mm-hmm.
and then you can watch the birds come to it in the fall. You can watch the butterflies, and it's very inspiring and motivating, I think.
It's like having your own bed and breakfast without humans making like a big mess. You know? So you don't have to do laundry, only your own. All right. Well, thank you so much, Paula. Have fun out there.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.